Good to go. Steve, thank you so much for being with me today. Really appreciate the opportunity. And I know you're halfway around the world, so obviously coordinating this took some doing on both our parts. So really excited to spend some time with you and learn from you today. You've really built a career and a brand on your work with the C-level. And as I spend a lot of time with sellers and sales leaders, that can sometimes be one of our biggest stumbling blocks, is really understanding how to build that C-level acumen, how to get those meetings, and also how to gain and earn the opportunity to influence at that level. So could you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you became an expert in connecting with the C-level and senior executives for successful meetings?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. I mean, I'm very, very old, so it's been a long journey. I didn't really take I never really wanted a career at all until I was sort of 30. I spent my time between university and 30 doing a heap of different jobs to make enough money to pay for my drugs and drink habits. I had fun, in other words. And I worked as a labourer, as a clerk, as a waiter, I did a heap of different jobs. I think I've had about 65, 70 jobs if you count part-time jobs.
Wow.
And that didn't do a lot for my career, but it did give me a broad understanding of different industries, different people, different levels. And then when I finally decided I'd better get a proper job in the UK, I got a job as a medical rep for a while, which gave me a theoretical background in selling, but in real life, medical reps don't sell. I mean, they don't prospect it. They know who their targets are. So it's not your traditional selling. And then I came to Australia on holiday just before I was 30, and for a year, and I never went back. When I was here on the back of my supposed selling experience, I thought, oh, I'll get into computers. So I joined Burroughs as a computer salesman, and I was absolutely terrible. I had no idea how to sell, none whatsoever. I couldn't prospect, I couldn't sell, I couldn't do anything, and no one taught me. They just assumed I knew. So
Yeah.
after 6 months, my boss said, Steve, you're a crap salesman, pardon the language, but you're quite smart. So why don't you move into support? And so I became a support person working with the salespeople in pre-sales support and also in post-sales support on the helpline. And I met my wife, who I've been with for 42 years, and I thought I'd better take it a bit more seriously. So I rose through the ranks and became a project manager. Then I became a support manager. And then when Burroughs became Unisys by merging with Sperry,
Yeah.
um, I moved into the finance department and I became a professional services manager. And doing that, I've worked with a lot of different companies and a lot of different industries. I helped salespeople selling to legal, to government, to commercial, to financial, and then I also worked in implementations. And when you're dealing with those companies, you get a very broad-based experience across many different industries. And you also get to deal with fairly senior people because it's back then buying a new computer was a big deal and it cost a lot of money and the people that were involved were not just the IT people but the senior business managers. And then when I was 42, Unisys offered me a lot of money to go away and I gratefully accepted it and paid off the mortgage. And I discovered that I had moved briefly into marketing because I thought I'd try something different. So I worked in marketing for a while. But it wasn't proper marketing. It was sort of regurgitate what the people in the States thought was marketing in an Australian context, which didn't really work that well. So it's not, even though my title was marketing manager, I wasn't calling the shots, as it were.
Right.
Um, and then I discovered that there wasn't a lot of opportunities for 42-year-old marketing people. And someone offered me a job as a ERP salesperson in a very small 15-person ERP developer in Australia. And I went in there at sales, and I still didn't know what I was doing. But I thought, well, I'd better find out. So I started reading and planning and doing things and trying things. Um, in the first 6 months, I was fortunate because it was a private company and they'd had a few salespeople that hadn't worked out. So they gave me time to fail. And let's face it, with an ERP, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Oh, I think I'll buy an ERP today." You know, it's a long-term proposition. And I
Yeah.
was doing cold calling and I hated it. But I thought, look, I hate this, I'm going to leave, but let me pretend I'm going to be here in a year's time. And when I had been there in a year's time, the calls I was making a year before were paying off. And so eventually I became the in charge of sales and marketing worldwide for that company. And I worked with them until they got taken over. And then I moved to Paris with the company they'd taken us over as a global account manager, working on a couple of deals with the two largest publishers in the world, because we specialized, among other things, in selling to publishers. And again, when you're selling to Pearson and McGraw Hill, which were my two targets, you're dealing with the COO and I spent a year in Paris, traveling around Europe, presenting to the management teams in Spain and Belgium and the UK and New Jersey and places like that. So you get to deal with a lot of senior executives. And of course, I was also, it was a small company, but I was in charge of sales and marketing worldwide. So to some degree, I was a senior executive. And doing that, you get to know what they're like. You get to go to what to talk about. You just get to learn stuff. So when I eventually came back to Australia and struck up by myself, I thought, oh yeah, I know a fair bit about sales now. I'll become a sales consultant. Then I realized that, sales consultants are 10 a penny or 10 a cent in your, oh, you call them pennies, don't you? Yeah, that's right. So there's an awful lot of sales consultants. And I thought, well, what do I really know? And at the time, I don't know if you know, Frontline Selling in Atlanta, there's a company there that they have a methodology for selling to C-level. And it's
Right.
it's quite a good methodology. And someone that I knew, the president of IBS in the US, who I knew, came over to the UK and he said, I found these people have got this great methodology. And so I called them and we had a chat and I started working with them and looking at their methodology. And I thought, I spent some time helping people get meetings with senior executives. And then I realized that they didn't actually know what to do with them. Um, I worked with a couple of the largest organizations in the world, and they said, "Can you get us meetings with senior executives?" I said, "Yeah, sure," and I did. And we used to have people recording the calls, typing the calls out to give feedback if they were on the phone. And I was reading these transcripts, and these people didn't have a clue. I mean, and I suddenly realized it's not enough just to help people get meetings. You need to help people get meetings and make those meetings mean something. And so that's what I've specialized in ever since.
So there's so many things that resonate with me there, Steve, and thank you for sharing your journey. What's fascinating to me, and there's some similarities. I talk to a lot of sellers, and even just in my own story and my own journey, the accidental elements of winding up doing what you do, right? Of becoming someone who is a sales consultant, but the unique approach that you take, because there's not a lot of folks that focus soundly on that C-level acumen. And I think it's something that's underdeveloped. It's an underused muscle. It's not something that a lot of sellers are predominantly very good at. The other element too that struck a chord with me is that you met your wife through the course of your journey. I interviewed mine for a job 17 and a half years ago. She got the job. She never worked for me directly, but just that made me smile. And then I think lastly, just the element that you shared about how this format, we can get meetings. I focus a lot, and I've always focused a lot on in my career of getting that first meeting, but so rarely do we really stick the landing when it comes to that first meeting and earn that second session. Now, there's some statistics that you share in some of your work that really jumped out at me as I was prepping for our talk today. One being 85% of first sales meetings are considered a waste of time by senior executives. And second, that salespeople perceive 80% of these meetings as successful. How is there such a disparity? Why are sellers quantifying this as a win, but executives saying that it's not? And how do we fix that gap?
Yeah, well, the figures I actually learned that from a gentleman called Jacques Skimas, who's the president of selling to executives in both in Boston and in Paris. But it actually comes from the first one comes from Forrester. They identified that in a survey, um, and basically the problem is that salespeople have happy ears. They want to believe things are going well. I've got a client, and I'm currently going through their ERP because they've got a lot of, not their ERP, sorry, their CRM and their Salesforce, because they've got a lot of nuts in Salesforce, and I'm helping them find opportunities that didn't go anywhere. And I could constantly say, had meeting, went really well. I think they liked us. No follow up. just didn't get a second meeting. And I think from a salesman's perspective, if they get out what they want to get out and they tell people all about how wonderful our stuff is and how it's going to help them, they think that's a good meeting. Um, and they can't understand how these stupid prospects don't understand how good we'd be for them. And what they don't think about is that they're just one of 1,000 salespeople that want to talk to these guys. And the executives have got their own agendas, their own perspectives, their own priorities, and their own timings. And you're not there to persuade them. You're there to find out what they care about and care about right now and see how you can help them get it. At its basic, sales is very simple. It's what Zig Ziglar said years and years ago. Find out what your customer wants and help them get it. Now, when I first heard that years ago, I thought, well, what happens if you don't have what they want? And the answer is they're not a prospect. Go somewhere else. Find people who have a problem that you can help them solve and help them solve it. It's simple. It's better not
I love
easy.
what you said about sellers having the happy ears. I remember I ran a call center years ago, and I remember so many sellers would get off these calls having been asked to just send me something, and they thought they had something. They thought they had a live prospect. And it's, they didn't realize that, I mean, they were in essence being a lot of customers, a lot of executives, they're not confrontational people. And they would just as soon leave a seller twisting in the wind with a maybe so, as opposed to giving them a definitive answer. And I couldn't agree more with you, Steve, because you said something really important there is that not all customers are prospects. If we don't have value that we can add for these customers, they're not a prospect. But you know what I've often found as well is there are ways that we as sellers can invest in those relationships meaningfully, even if they're not an immediate prospect. I've even gone so far as to introduce my friend at the competitor when I knew I wasn't a fit, because I'm always trying to earn the right to be the trusted advisor. And if they know that they can come to me and I'm going to give them a straight answer, and I'm not going to just try to cram my solution down their throat, but I'm willing to even introduce my competition to make sure they have a good experience, those are the types of things that I think we can do to earn the right to influence some of these senior executives, because their time is precious. They are pulled in a lot of different directions. They hear from 1,000 of us a month, if not more. And frankly, that's why we have to do even more due diligence when it comes to qualifying, when it comes to showing up with value and showing up uniquely amidst all that noise, like using personalized approaches, video, and frankly, calling out actionable insights with those organizations and being better storytellers. Now, you've got this How to Sell at C-Level program, and it sounds fascinating to me. Could you tell me a little bit more about the key components of that How to Sell at C-Level program, and what could a participant expect to learn and achieve from that?
Okay, I will. But before that, I will pick up on one thing you said. You said
Yeah.
the right that you've got to earn the right to be a trusted advisor. You know, people say I'm a trusted advisor, but you've got to build trust. You've got to earn trust, and that means doing the right thing. It means, I mean, my longest sales cycle was about 8 years.
Wow.
I and by the time the it was HarperCollins, and by the time HarperCollins bought an ERP of me, they knew me inside out, and I knew them inside out because I'd shown I wasn't trying to close them this quarter. I was learning about them, understanding that no, they couldn't buy the ship as they're building a warehouse or just developing that trust. And I mean, I didn't want it to be 8 years, but sometimes that's when
Yeah.
people buy an ERP. So so if you have a meeting with someone, one of the outcomes can be, yeah, we're interested in what you say, but not yet. Then what do? You have to nurture them, build the relationship, not hassle them and call them every 6 months and say, hi, are you ready yet? But find ways that you can, I hate to use the word add value because it's hackney, but you have to be able to build that trust, build that relationship, show them that you are working for them, not for yourself. And to answer your other question, um, we've, I'm working with a guy called Fred Costake in the UK. Now, one of the things, I don't know if it's the Bible or Confucius said, know thyself, but you need to know your strengths and weaknesses. And I've got a lot of strengths. I know a lot about senior executives. I know a lot about looking at things from other people's perspectives, but I've also got weaknesses. I'm not particularly organized and I've got a low patience tolerance. So I've picked Fred as a partner who's very organized and is very patient working on it together. So what we do is we put together a course which is designed to help people just do two simple things: get a meeting with the right person in the right company at the right level. And secondly, make sure that that meeting goes as well as humanly possible. And you can't make it succeed because you can walk through the door and you can do all the right things and they can say, oh, look, I love what you say, it's brilliant, but I bought from your competitor last week. Okay. But you can at least maximize the chances of those meetings going well. And by going well, I mean you understand, you provide the person you're talking to with some value. You show that you've thought about their problems or their priorities from their perspective. Sort of P's there, isn't there? And um, you've given them insights because they know their company, they know their issues, but you know lots of companies who have similar issues, and you can say, well, other companies that have had this issue have done this, this, and this. You can bring an additional perspective. And again, I mentioned Jacques Schemas. When he was senior, he was a vice president or president, actually. I think companies like Boston Bank and some very big companies. And he said he loved salespeople because they brought him a different, good salespeople, because they brought him a different perspective and different ideas, and they worked for free. So this course is designed to do everything from helping salespeople identify which companies to target. Because marketing will say to you, oh, our ideal customer is this type of thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that type of company is in your territory. If you're a salesperson, you've got a patch. And it may be that your patch, I mean, the market in Australia is very different to the market in the USA. It's smaller, more concentrated. And the way that you go to market here and the techniques you use vary because in the USA you can afford to burn through a lot of potential customers to get the right one because you've got a heap of people there. Here we've got a smaller market. You've got to be a bit more selective. So it's designed to show, okay, for me as a salesperson or a sales manager or a sales director, in my territory, my area, which are the what is the profile of the customers I want to go for, and which specific companies fit that profile? You need to know the actual companies. And then the next question is, okay, which personas, which roles do I want to go for in those companies? Who would I like to get a meeting with if I ideally can? And that's great, but you don't sell to personas, you sell to people. So the question is, in this company, who are the specific people I want to talk to?
Yeah.
And then once you've got that, what does this person care about? In this company, in this industry, in this country, at this time? What are their priorities? Because we've all got problems. I've got a hernia at the moment. I'm getting old, so I've got a bit of arthritis. I had a stroke 5 years ago. We've all got lots of problems. I'm not going to bother about a hangnail if I'm having a stroke. So what's my priority? And just because you've got a return on investment and they've got a problem you can solve doesn't mean it's the problem they have to solve right now. So these are all things you need to think about. And then once you've thought of, and you mentioned qualifying earlier, and it's not a question of calling a prospect to qualify. You pre-qualify by identifying the people that you need to talk to. And that's 2/3 of the qualifying process. And then the final thing is once you've got that meeting with the right person, how do you prepare for it? How do you handle it? How do you follow it up? And how do you achieve your objectives, which is hopefully to sign a sales opportunity either now or at some stage in the future?
So much goodness. First off, being able to and being willing to do a SWOT analysis around yourself as a seller, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I love that you called that out. I think it's important for every seller to do that, not only of themselves, but also of their solutions and their competitor solutions. Because you're not going to win by taking out a strength of your competitor. You're going to win by taking out their weakness or their opportunity and your strength. Same thing as being a seller. You're not going to be strong in all areas. And if you know where you're strong and you can double down on those and you can develop some of your opportunities, that's how you can become a game-changing seller. I realized early on, especially in my sales career, what I was very strong at, orchestrating opportunities and doing some of the things that you've articulated. What I find great about this conversation, Steve, many things, but one that really sticks out to me is, you're talking about philosophies of Zig Ziglar. You're talking about fundamentals of selling. And I found in a couple of decades in sales personally that sales is all about people and process. It's a game of probabilities, and you can control very distinct things. There's a lot of things that you cannot control, but you can control the quality of your message. You can control the quantity of your outreach, who you're reaching out to, the people that you've selected, that getting to that level, and the people that you kind of engage meaningfully. And then lastly, the consistency of your execution and process, right? So those are things that you can control in the selling process. And those fundamentals never change. Now, the way that we can use different tools and technology has changed. I started out in a call center where I was picking up a physical phone, pounding the phone, calling off of printed out spreadsheets. And now compare and contrast that to today, where I can go out and follow all of my target prospects on LinkedIn. I can see what they're talking about and what they're posting about. And now I know what they care about and what matters to them. And so if I have a talk track or a use case or a story that is relevant to what they're talking about, it's game on. I know exactly how to get those meetings. And so I think those are some of the key elements. And I love that. Thank you for articulating a lot of the key areas where you've identified synergies around how do we find the right companies? How do we find the right people? How do we craft the message? But I think that kind of leads us to the next step, which is about relationship building. You and I talked about this earlier, earning that right to be trusted advisor. How do you recommend creating and nurturing relationships after that initial meeting where we can often fail? That first meeting is make or break. How do we earn that second meeting? How do we create a relationship that is built on trust and credibility?
The first meeting is critical. And it's not just handling that meeting, it's who you have that meeting with. If you go in too low, you can get blocked. You can spend an awful lot of time trying to win a deal that is always going to go to the CEO's brother-in-law or whatever. Right. So, that's why it's important it's much better to start at the top and work your way down than to try and start at the bottom and work your way up. Um, and when you go in to meet someone, you need to be able to look at things from their perspective, see what their priorities are, but give them some insights. There's two big well, there's many, but there's two big challenges salespeople have when they go into a meeting. First of all, they first throw up, show up and throw up. They just talk about themselves, their products. They have the same pitch. They don't adapt it to the particular person. It's all about you and your product rather than the prospect. And the second thing is discovery. There's a huge amount of talk about on LinkedIn and other places about doing discovery. But if I'm a senior executive and I've given you half an hour, 10 minutes of my time, why would I spend that time teaching you about my business? I don't want to do that. I want you to tell me something that you know that will help me. So you can't go in there to discover how their business works. You've got to go in knowing how their business works. So if you've done your research, you know similar people with other people with a similar problem. And you've got to say, in my experience, companies in your position or people in your position have this, and this issue. And these are the consequences of those issues. And these are the things perhaps you may have done about those issues. And am I right? You don't go into discovery, you go into confirm or deny. You go into with a hypothesis that says, I believe it's likely that you have this issue based upon my research, based upon looking at your annual report if you're a public company, based upon what you're saying on LinkedIn. And I think it's likely that you're suffering these consequences, and I may be able to help. Can we talk? And if you can do that, then you're building that rapport and building that relationship because you're giving them something of value and you're giving them insights that they wouldn't normally have.
Okay, so a couple of notes. Love this. Start high. We've got to attempt to influence the influencers and their influencers. And I always like to say, look, I can reach out to 1, 2, 5, 10 C-level executives, and I may not get the meeting, right? But if I reach out to their influencers as well, and I can start to kind of create that groundswell of influence, and I can start having these conversations with their generals and their lieutenants, and now I'm armed with information that's going to be even more credible and viable in that senior executive's eyes that I ultimately want to get that meeting with. Guess what? You take that snowball that turns into an avalanche in these conversations. The other one is getting blocked. You know what I love about this, Steve? So in my organization, I become very, very fortunate because I became known for social selling. I heard long ago our biggest problem is we get stuck in certain relationships, which are great relationships. We need them. IT and procurement. We're always going to need those are the lifeblood of our relationships with a lot of organizations. But in order to truly influence and do what we want to do transformationally with organizations, we got to get into the other rooms of the house, these other key business stakeholders, CEO, CFO, COO. And so in order to do that, sometimes you get blocked. You will be siphoned off. You will be, kept in a box. It happens, but you get paid to create and nurture these relationships. And it's important to take that seriously. As long as you're sharing insights, you're doing your research, you're showing up credibly, and you can explain yourself as to why you're doing this, why your charter is to own that all up relationship or to really arm yourself with an understanding of that organization. And you take that seriously, you can wade through that. Sometimes you'll need a thick skin in those getting blocked scenarios. But I think that's the key element. And then the last thing I would say on that note is don't sound like everybody else that's reaching out to these customers, or you're going to be treated just like everybody else. You're going to be unopened in their inbox, or you're going to be ignored. And it's not personal. They don't have the time to respond to all 1,000 sellers that reach out. So unless you show up saying something that gets their attention or gets them thinking about why they should be talking to you or to your organization, you're not going to get the meeting. And you're sure as heck not going to get a second meeting. Right now, I'm reading The Jolt Effect. And actually, I've got Matt Dixon coming up on the podcast. He also co-wrote Challenger Sale. And what I love about Jolt Effect is that it also speaks to the fact that a lot of times they did a bunch of studying of calls that were recorded in and after the pandemic, right? Because now a lot of them are recorded, and just looked for some of those commonalities of when customer executives indicated that they might be interested in moving forward with a proposed way of doing things, but they ultimately didn't. And what it showed is that we too often as sellers, we sell to what we think is against status quo, or we sell to what we think is the weakness or the ROI, like you were talking about before, Steve. But the reality is we've got to sell more to de-risking the decision for them, because if status quo is more attractive than making what they perceive to be a risk, they will stick with status quo even if they're not married to status quo. So that's the other element that we've got to be cognizant against is, are we selling the right way? Now, I would love to hear your thoughts, and then, kind of parlaying that into success stories from your experience, or just, where you've applied some of these strategies that's led to significant breakthroughs in selling to C-level.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned a lot of things. I mean, people talk a lot about ROI, but even if you've got a massive ROI, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the issue. It's the best ROI. Initially, your biggest competitor is either do nothing or other use of funds. Spend the money somewhere else. I've not lost deals. I had deals delayed when I was trying to sell an ERP, and the managing director said, "Yeah, we love what you're selling, Steve, but we're building a warehouse this year." And we can't do both. And then 2 years later, they actually paid us to develop a warehouse management system as part of our ERP. So you've got to hang in there. Oh, I don't know what that was. So I lost my track of thought there. So where were we? That noise put me off
Just on
totally.
the Yeah, no, just on the talk track around the ERP piece. And, the ROI can be astronomical, right? But we're not selling to an ROI per se. That's one of the many
Oh, risk.
variables
Yeah, risk
that
you
is
mentioned.
ultimately going to be a deciding factor.
Yeah. And risk is, you've talked a few things. Risk is a big issue. You've got to
Yeah.
de-risk it. Any change is a risk. Now, and certainly, large systems like that are a huge risk. Oh yes, we're not just talking about ERPs. We're talking about anything that involves a major change in the company. Doesn't just cost them what they pay you. It costs them what it costs to implement whatever you're selling. It costs the disruption in the company. There's a whole amount of risk, and you've got to address risk up front. And in fact, one of the things that you can add of value when you're talking to executives, tell them what the risks are and how you manage those risks. What a lot of people will do is they'll try and downplay the risks. Oh, no, she'll be right, mate, as we see here in Australia. No, no, you say, you're right to be scared. It is risky, but this is what we do to make sure that we minimize those risks. And you're not just, and you're, if you're selling against the status quo, you're selling a future. You've got the what's the word? You've got the current pain or the current problem and the current consequences, but you've also got what Andy Raskin calls the promised land. This is
Yeah.
where you will be when you've made those changes, and you've got to. It's the hero's journey. You've got to pay, and you've got to go through the hero's journey to get to the promised land, and you've got to overcome these obstacles and manage these risks on the way, and you've got to lay that out in its full ugly reality. And by doing that, you will gain credibility. You've also got to be able to deliver, by the way. There's no point being a salesperson that lays a beautiful path and then not delivering. Because one of the problems I have is the concept of closing a sale. To me, you're not closing a sale. You're opening a long-term relationship with a customer who you want to help succeed. If you focus on making your quarterly number, then you're focusing on the wrong thing. You should be focusing on helping your customer to succeed. And when that happens, they will go to someone else and they'll call you. They will talk to their other people. They will give you references, and they will buy more stuff on you, offer you in the future.
I That was kind of what we call a mic drop moment right there. Relationships beget deals. If you're focused on the deal, then you're going to get in your own way, and you're also not going to be able to de-risk the decision, because some of the most important work in the relationship happens when you have issues that arise, and you're able to sit in that with your customer and work with them through those issues. Or after the deal is done and there's implementation, and you change management, right? So those are some of the risks that your customers see. Come right out of the gate and have them identify where all the areas where they see risk. Sometimes that is your biggest objection, but it's the one that becomes not stated because it's the one we're not proactively looking for. We go in trying to look for all these things like return on investment, which is important, but at the same time, if we can't de-risk the deal in our customers' eyes, there is no deal. And so I think that's one key element to point out. Steve, this has been amazing. And as we kind of come to a close here today, I'd love to have you share anything else that you'd want our audience to know about selling at clevel.com, your program, and then just any other insights that you think would be valuable for our audience.
Okay, thank you. Look, it's been really good. I've enjoyed it. We could have kept going for another hour, I suspect, but we've put together this program that which people can get at selling at clevel.com. We're currently looking for beta testers, people, because I'm good off the top of my head. I'm good
Yeah.
talking. I'm good at talking at things. Fred is more organised than me, and between us we make a reasonably good team. But what we're not trying. One of the reasons we focused on this particular relatively small area, we've kept it small deliberately, because sales, there's a lot in sales, but you can't learn how to sell from a training course. What you can do is you can change your perspective, you can get insights, sure, you can get techniques and tactics, and we have techniques and tactics in there, but it's more about strategy. You know as well as I do, on LinkedIn, you've got lots of hacks. Here's a hack for an email that works, or a call opening that works. And yeah, but the thing is, if everyone's using them, then you said before, you've got to be different to other people. And I'm sure that there's a lot of tactics in there, but it's more important, what's your strategy? Where are you going to spend your time? You talked about what you can control, and one thing you can control is how you spend your time. And I think we spend far too much time doing stuff and being active, and not nearly enough time thinking and planning a strategy. How am I going to which of the customers are going to get into? How am I going to get into them? What do they care about? Once I get in, what am I going to do? I've got this meeting. What can possibly happen? What questions are they likely to ask? There's a lot of thought that we don't do a lot of the time. We just dash in and do the same over and over again by rote. So we've tried to address that. We've tried to give people a different perspective. I can't teach people the same techniques as to how to get meetings. I can give them ways to, what I want to try and do is give them ways to plan for their territory, for their product, for their types of prospects and customers, how they can plan and schedule and create those meetings, and how they can plan and schedule and make those meetings as successful as possible. So rather than just saying do A, B, and C, we do a bit of that, but rather than saying do A, B, and C, I'm saying think about how you do A, B, and C. And that's what the course is designed to do. It's designed to teach people, to show people how I hate cliches, but it's a little bit more showing them how to fish rather than giving them a handful of fish. So that's what the course is all about. And we say, and it also says, who's it for? This is not for an SDR who's been on the phone for 6 months. If you're going to sell at executive level, you've got to have the gravitas. You've got to have enough experience to talk to them on their level, in their language. One thing we haven't talked about is terminology. If I'm talking to I used to sell to book publishers. I could talk ISBNs and extents and book production and pub dates and things in publishing language because I understood publishing. You've got to talk your customer's language. And we, as salespeople, we tend to talk our own language, closing deals and videos and all these things. Talk to your customer in your customer's language. That's one of the many things we cover. But at the end of the course, um, people will come out of it being able to plan how they sell at sea level. That's what I want them to achieve.
That is so powerful, so relevant. And I just want to say, because I look, there's a lot of people that are getting into sales, they're relatively new in career. And then there's a lot of savvy, cagey sales veterans like you and me that have been doing this a long time. And, I pride myself, especially the longer I've been blessed to be in sales, I pride myself in being a student of selling. I try to study every element that's going to make me better. And I think my best advice would be don't overthink, but definitely don't underthink. Sales is a body of work. And I think the key element is continue to look for these areas where you can leverage your unique skills and your unique strengths to make everyone around you better and to help your customers win. Understand what is a win to them. And if you work diligently to invest in that relationship to deliver them a win, you're going to win too. And I think that's the other element of it is the more you know how to approach these situations, find your ideal customer profile, find your ideal executive profile, and know how to approach them, you're going to master being a student of the game. I think where I've really tried to strive to get in my career is a level of mastery, and there's always more to learn. I love that you focus, Steve, on this level of C-level acumen because it is, frankly, an area where we don't spend enough time talking. And like you said, it is not something that's trained often enough. Sales can't holistically be trained. We can learn bits and pieces all over the place. I've been in some great sales trainings in my career. I've also had a great sales training as an event in time, but then the company didn't invest in, really continuing to ensure that it was successful over time and reinstilling some of those themes. Not my current company, but previous companies. And then furthermore, I picked up so much through experiences, learning by doing, making mistakes, and being able to see around corners better the next time. But you can pick up so much about sales throughout your experience. But that C-level acumen will serve you infinitely well if you want to be successful in selling.
Indeed, and what you say is very true. You go on so many sales training courses, you're inspired, you think, yes, that's going to be great, I'm going to do that, and then time moves on, and all of a sudden, you maybe if you got one or two good things out of it, you're doing pretty well. What I want to do is give something what we're doing is providing something that people can go back to, that they can use over and over again. They can and it will add to. So the beta testing program we've currently got, we're offering people the course at half price to help us get it better, to connect with us directly and ask us questions, and we'll add those Q&As into the course and make and add more and more things that people can go back to, but not more areas, more what's the word I'm looking for, more different ways of doing the same things, so people can go back in a week, a month, a year, and re go over the materials and see the new materials that are going in that reinforce the same lessons.
Yeah, I mean,
That's the objective.
it's all about regrounding ourselves in the fundamentals. You haven't invented any wheels here, but what you've done is you've gotten very, very grounded in the fundamentals of doing something very specific, which is vital to sales success. And I think that's the key element because far too often, we get attracted by this new shiny way of doing things, or, we flood the LinkedIn inboxes talking about how great our product is. But the reality is that's not going to resonate at all. What's going to resonate is exactly the blueprint that you're building. And that's why we've got to get grounded in fundamentals. That's why great athletes, they practice regularly because it's all about making sure that we are grounded in those fundamentals and we can execute professionally. Steve, this was amazing. Thanks so much for the time. Any final words?
Well, you mentioned athletes, and I think that's a very good analogy. One analogy I'm thinking with what we're doing is that if you're a 100-meter sprinter, you will spend a lot of time focusing on getting out of the blocks quickly. If you can get out of the blocks 1/10 of a second faster than your competitor, you're ahead of the game. And what we're doing with this course is helping people get out of the blocks in sales by getting in by people talk about closing the sale. To me, the most important part of the sale is opening the sale, and that's what we
Yeah.
focus on.
Yeah, it's a game of probability and odds. And if you give yourself a better probability of finding the right customer, getting the meeting, and earning the second meeting, building a foundation of trust and transparency and communication with that customer, your probability of getting a deal goes way up.
Yep, absolutely.
Steve, this was amazing. Thank you so much. We'll have to do this again sometime. I learned a lot, and you've got me jazzed up for another selling day. So thank you. And to our audience, be sure to check out sellingatclevel.com and the package and program that Steve and his counterpart have put together. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you next time.